Hello, Shayne. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Welcome to the Founders Podcast. Before we start, Shayne, do you have a favorite quote, something that motivates you, inspires you, you would like to share with our audience?
It's a General Eisenhower quote or President Eisenhower quote. It says, "Plans are worthless. Planning is everything."
Hmm.
The idea
That is,
that the
yeah,
process of planning and working through all of the potential scenarios and outcomes is really where the value is because you have to always be prepared to pivot.
indeed, indeed. And then again, as Naval Ravikant says that, there are 8 billion people on the earth, and they're almost everyone is thinking about business, and they have the ideas, but it's what matters when you get those ideas out of your head and then start implementing, planning it, and put it on the paper, right? So that makes sense.
And you lose control of it a little bit once it's out of your head.
Indeed, indeed. You get to know the reality, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Great stuff. So Shane, imagine we are in a room full of ambitious founders, early stage builders, and they're all waiting for you in a room. No one knows you, no one have heard your name before, and you walk into the room. The spotlight is on you, the mic is on with you. What would you tell them about your story that they will listen to it and they will stick with us for the rest of the episode? What they will learn, what they will understand with this story. And most of our listeners are founders or people who want to become founders, right? So how do you communicate that piece?
I think probably the best uh, the best thing I would be able to share in that situation would be an anecdote that led to me becoming a founder myself. I had not set out to be a founder or set out to be an entrepreneur at any point in my background, um, but I saw a problem that definitely needed a solution. It happened when my co-founder, my spouse actually, was on the acquisition side of an M&A deal. And I learned about this after the fact. It was an AI SaaS company. Um, Probably max, it was a couple of founders with max 20 employees total, but they were getting acquired, which is, I think, for most founders, huge. It's a goal, a potential goal. And they started going through the diligence process for this acquisition. And it was uncovered that 6 years prior, when they started the company, they hadn't adhered to data privacy guidance and regulations. And as a result, they were subject to a penalty called algorithmic disgorgement, which is a mouthful, but in the US, it is becoming increasingly common because it's easy for a company to do the calculation and say, I'm not going to comply because this product's going to make me $10 billion and the fine will be $1 billion. That's easy math. You just take the fine. So what regulators have started to do is make you delete everything that was built on the data that was handled non-compliantly. That's algorithmic disgorgement. And so it essentially wipes out an entire product. You can't reverse engineer that. And so the valuation of the company went from like low eight figures, not the biggest deal in the history of business, but substantial if you're a founder, down to mid six figures, basically the value of their debt. And it was a 96% drop. Like it's, I mean, it was devastating. And they had to become basically acquisition hires. Um, and it's not the kind of thing that you can then cover back up because it's like if you are selling a house and you discover there's mold in the basement, you can't just not disclose that to the next buyer because that would be fraud on top of everything. Um, so just seeing that when it was 100% preventable, like these weren't bad people, they just didn't know what they didn't know. It showed it was really educational or enlightening for me in that just because I understood something about trust and compliance and data privacy didn't mean anyone else does. And there wasn't a good solution for this small company starting out. So seeing that problem, identifying it, and understanding that knowledge gap and realizing that people needed that from me, I think was huge. Um, but we really just wanted to make sure that other founders don't fall into the same issue where there is that knowledge gap, that fall into the same problem where there is that knowledge gap, and they don't find themselves in a situation that's irreversible because they didn't know what they didn't know.
So what you're saying is, one day I woke up and I received an email from my uh, from my accountant, or the person who is doing the deal for me for the acquisition, that Ash, the company who was trying to acquire you for 10 million, are saying that they cannot give you more than 1 million, and everything started burning. I went to office and I started digging, and I realized, because the startup I have built with my blood and sweat for the last 2 years, I was not aware of the data privacy laws, like, on which my startup was built. And that is why, when the acquisition was going forward, they dig deep in and they understood that I did not follow those laws. That's why all the data I acquired in last 2-3 years with all of my sweat equity is worthless, because the government is now penalizing me to wipe all the data out and then do the deal. And the acquisition party understands it very well. And that's why they have reduced the valuation from 10 million to 1 million straight away.
Yes, not just erasing the data, but everything that you got from the data, everything you built on the data. So, I think we all know AI basically is data. It's built on
Yeah.
data. That's its foundation. So if you're leveraging AI, it's all data. And then all of marketing, all of, everything in a company's CRM, that's data.
Yeah.
Um, the number of times I talk to somebody and they're like, "Oh, well, we don't collect personal data." I'm like, "Do you have a mailing list?"
That is data, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So that essentially means that if you have started a startup and you haven't been following the data protection laws, or data privacy laws, you might be sitting on a ticking time bomb.
Essentially, yes. There are things that can be done where you build up a defensible narrative, but you have to, I mean, it has already created what we call compliance debt. It's like tech debt, where you
Mm.
have to reverse engineer and fill the gaps and everything after the fact. Um, but there is an opportunity, and what we found in our experience is that building a defensible narrative, building out what you're trying to do right goes a long way. Though I will say, we kind of think of, for compliance, for trust, we think of there being three regulators. Most people go to three audiences. Most people think of the regulators. Clearly, that was top of mind for me too. But we sort of think of them as a distant third. They are not omniscient, they're not omnipresent, and mostly they are focused on bigger names. For founders with startups, the biggest audiences are, for B2B companies, I would say it's potential customers or clients. If you want to sell to enterprises, if you want to sell to a sophisticated consumer like another business, a lot of them are going to actually require certifications or um, information security assessments or RFPs before they'll purchase from you, because they want their environment to be safe, or at least defensible. Um, and then otherwise, for startups, investors are a huge audience because they don't want to invest their money in something that's going to tank in valuation. And things like compliance are part of that essential valuation security.
So let's dig further this particular imaginary scenario, right? It's perfect. Anyone could fall into this particular scenario if they are building not just an AI, but any kind of software or data related startup, right? Do I still have hope at this point, at this day, when I received the call? I rushed to the office and I saw that my valuation has dropped 10x. Do I still have hope? Can I treat it as compliance debt? Can I reach out to Shayne and ask for help? Or is it for me?
I think there's always the hope that there's always hope. There's always a way of building it back up. I think in the scenario you described, it's a pretty big hole to dig out of because you're already at the point of trying to sell. So you would have to rebuild quite a bit. So that's why a lot of our clients we start working with actually while they're building a product, even, or while they're still in development or pre-revenue, because building it in, people like to say by design, is the easiest. Um, but that being said, like I said, I use the phrase defensible narrative. I think that is really illustrative of what investors in particular are going to want to see. They're going to want to see that you course corrected or on the right track and are focused on what needs to be done in reality, as opposed to just burying your head in the sand and ostriching about the issue. So, yeah, I don't think anything is permanent or what have you. I rarely say 100% about anything. Um, so there's always a way to manage the situation if you can get enough ahead of it.
Interesting. So tell me, one thing is, okay, I still have hope. We could still do something about it. But what if somebody is working on a data startup right now? What kind of, is there a checklist? Is there something which they should refer to? What kind of data protection, privacy, um, compliance they should be following in terms of uh, making sure that they don't fall into this kind of, scenario?
So I think if anyone listening pays attention to the landscape of AI regulation and data privacy, especially AI is in the news so much right now with all the changes, you'll know the landscape and the regulations and how things are being determined. It changes weekly, like
Yeah.
if not day to day. There are things coming out. So what we actually recommend is aligning to certifications and frameworks because they are much more static. And the big secret is that no company is ever going to be or is 100% compliant with anything. It's just not possible if you're going to run an effective business because you have to make business decisions and make those risk calculations. And so those certifications and frameworks, if you do the analysis and align it to your specific business needs, that's going to get you 85, 90, maybe even 95% of the way there. And that gives you that defensible narrative where if somebody starts to drill down, you actually have something objective to refer to where you're saying that we're aligning to ISO 27001 for our information security. And if you're building AI, you add in 42001. And then you can say that your timeline is X number of months until you're aligned, but you're not pursuing certification at this point because XYZ. There's a story you can tell that aligns to things people understand. These certifications are a heuristic or a shorthand for I'm trying to do the right thing.
So basically, what we are saying, even the giants like Meta, Google, they're not even 100% compliance because
No, it's not possible. If you want to run a profitable business, I mean, you would be completely paralyzed trying to make any business decisions if you were trying to follow every regulation across even the United States, much less the world.
Yeah,
They make calculated risk decisions.
indeed, indeed.
It's about being
Okay.
strategic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally get that. It's difficult. It's even in health science, most of the vaccine medicines we are consuming for, cure, their effectiveness is their effectiveness range goes from 65 to 80, 85%. There are rarely any vaccine or any medicine manufactured, tested, which actually have 100% effect on 100% of human race, right? So even the nature dictates the similar kind of data.
There are no absolutes.
They're
Death
not
and taxes,
absolutes.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Great stuff. So, what advice would you give to founders who rely heavily on algorithmic visibility but worry that data privacy audit or integration during acquisition could temporarily harm their reach? The reason I'm asking is this is because this is the first time I'm hearing this, you know, algorithmic penalty, which you have mentioned. I can't even pronounce it properly. Um,
Mouthful.
yeah, and I mean, we in UK we follow very closely the AI EU Act. They're really good. They're so good that they are pioneers in at least in Europe when it comes to formalize the accountability, the transparency, the explainability part of AI systems. They're doing really good. We are trying to follow up with them and kind of learn from them as well as implement it in-house also. I'm sure US also doing something similar, right? But still, it's new. It's still in the baby phase, right? It hasn't been there for a long time. It sounds like when the internet arrived in this world and then the first search engine in 1998, Google was there, people started popping up their businesses. And for first, I don't know, 5, 7 years, there was not even a confirmation box under the email list capturing lead form, right? Like you put your email and that's it. Now you have to do all this kind of GDPR compliance, double opt-ins, all of this kind of thing, because we have been matured in that particular uh, 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 vertical of the data harvesting part. Being at the baby stage right now in this world, in particularly in the data space, um, is there a step by step sort of like a framework or blueprint you have created for your customers or potential clients, which they can look into and say, okay, my particular use case fits into this area, and I think I should start thinking about this. SOC 2, ICO compliance in UK, GDPR EU. Is there something available like that, or is it still I have to go back to ChatGPT and ask the same questions?
Well, there are frameworks already for EU for AI governance. They're in place already. The ISO IEC that puts out data privacy and information security frameworks and certifications. They released the 42001 certification and framework, and NIST for cybersecurity has an AI framework to align to. I think we are in the baby phase of regulating AI, but I think it was about 10 years ago, almost exactly, that GDPR was passed as a regulation as opposed to guidelines, something, optional. Um, and this time around with the AI Act, it's very interesting because I think people learned by not taking GDPR seriously beforehand. And so this time around, we saw so many people who are in this space preparing for the AI Act implementation rollout, as opposed to what happened with GDPR, where so many companies got caught unawares of how massive the impact was going to be on business operations. So I think we're maturing not just in what we're applying guidance and governance and ethical standards to, but also in how we're preparing and what our expectations are also in how a business is going to conduct itself. Like when governance is required or recommended or whatever it is, or even just hanging out there as an ethical question, I think businesses are more sensitive to taking it seriously because they saw how much they had to scramble when GDPR was rolled out.
Hmm. Yeah, and I see that. So we create a lot of iOS applications and we distribute it on App Store, and I see that because we are in EU, we've been scrutinized pretty hard compared to the organizations outside EU when it comes to the data privacy laws here by Apple itself. And Apple is worldwide, right? And you can't even publish an application on App Store if you don't adhere to EU GDPR laws and don't, provide clear links to the GDPR guidelines for your application. One thing I was wondering is, what's the range of this penalty? For example, you said that if the penalty is lower enough to just pay and get out of that problem, what's the range of it? How does it
It's,
like?
I mean, for the EU AI Act, it's I depending on how egregious the violation is, it's either the greater or lesser of 7% of your annual in revenue, not net, not profit, your revenue worldwide. Or I think off the top of my head, I believe it's 35 million euro. So
Minimum. And then
yeah,
if it goes above
it, well,
that, then it's
if
seven.
it's if it's a minor infraction, it's the lower of the two. If it's really egregious, it's the greater of the two.
Okay. So you're saying that, let's say if I'm making 1 million revenue in a year, I could have end up paying penalty 7%, which is almost around £70,000 for that year. Is that penalty last until you don't get compliance, or is it just one time?
So it's just rolling out. We don't know exactly how enforcement's going to look, but it's if it's mirroring GDPR, it's a one-time penalty.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think if you continue to, you know,
Not
ignore
be
it,
compliant.
there
Yeah,
would be multiple infractions, though. I think would be more of how it would play out.
got it. And if I'm making 1,000 million revenue in a year, then my penalty would be 35 million euros, or
Well, if you're
70% of
making, I mean, 1,000 million, so a billion, it would actually
billion.
be 70 million potentially
Right. Okay.
if it's
So
if it's a really bad, yeah.
yeah. So 35 million is not the top threshold. It's not. It's basically just there to showcase if you come under that threshold, then this might be something you have to.
It's yeah, it's waiting and with GDPR, it's 3%. So they're raising the stakes. Um, but honestly, it comes down to what the regulators are able to see and enforce. Like I said, they tend to be the third most important audience. We try not to lean into scare tactics because it is it's a process, and we've actually never run into a situation where it ended in a penalty. It's always just been like a get well plan. It's hey, like what do we need to do to get in line? And then they'll give us some recommendations and we implement.
Indeed. Yeah, because we all want the same thing, right? We want to be compliant. We want to be, uh, you know, serving our customers in a way that it works for all of us. And the government agencies are also trying to do that to make more and more organizations more aware of these compliances so that it's more productive.
And the government agencies, the regulators, they come in more with B2C companies. I think that's where it's more of a consideration, especially if you're operating in a space that touches on, sensitive data, sensitive information like health data, financial data, kids data, um, that sort of thing. Or biometrics. It's more about protecting individual consumers who are not the sophisticated consumers that a B2B company would have.
Indeed, indeed. And have you heard about this recent glitch happened in Twitter X? So the Grok AI on Twitter.
Mhm.
So if you go to Gemini and you upload a famous celebrity's picture and then you ask Gemini, can you like do this and that? Gemini will say, no, I would not do it because I recognize this face. Or the response is basically saying, no, I would not be able to do that. In Grok, it was doing it. It was doing anything and everything, whatever people were asking. And then people started complaining about it to Musk. And I don't know what happened. They stopped it or not. Is that something which could cause problem to an AI startup founder or organization if they're using a third party underlying technology IP?
100%. Unfortunately, every company is exposed via their vendor stack.
Hmm.
In the US, we had a few years ago the Target data breach. Everyone knows it because everyone shops at Target. But what most people don't remember is it was actually one of Target's vendors that had the breach. It wasn't Target. It was a vendor that had actually, ironically, just completed their SOC 2 Type 1 audit for the year, which is an audit that shows a snapshot in time versus the Type 2 audit, where they watch you over a period of 90 days typically. Um, but they had SOC 2 certification. They weren't keeping up with the actual operations to maintain practices that they said they were doing when they did the audit. As Target's vendor, Target ended up in the news all over the place for having a data breach. It's the same, like you're just because your vendors have certifications, it doesn't bubble wrap you, but also every vendor you have is a potential vulnerability that you need to consider and be careful about. You need to look at for risk, do the analysis, make sure that they're keeping up with their certifications, all of it. Um, it's it can feel like an overwhelming task, but it goes into that defensible narrative that I keep referring to it because you want to make sure that you're if you're going to be sharing your data for processing a with a third party, they're going to treat it as if in the same way you would want them to treat it. I had a CRM startup contact me to beta a CRM with AI that sounded like the solution to so many of my operational headaches. And I said, well, I just need to know that you're not going to train your model on my data. And they wouldn't guarantee that. So I had to say no. You have to ask those questions and take responsibility because ignorance is not ignorance is not a defense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And that is why it is very important that, I mean, at least in the Google, I have started seeing that they have uh, been forcing, or not forcing, they're been advising that um, a governance layer for every single AI RAG or architecture you create is kind of necessary now to make sure that the input and the output is treated in the fair manner. I think Microsoft is also doing it in Azure with their Foundry uh, platform. Um, would you be able to give our listeners uh, some numbers around how much these compliance actually cost? I was looking at some numbers around SOC 2. I don't know if it is correct. Does that cost like $100,000 or something to get
For a large
SOC 2?
enterprise, yeah,
For
absolutely, it can,
Okay,
but not for a
let's talk
small
about
company.
startups. Let's talk
Yeah,
about startups then.
for a startup, oftentimes the certification platforms that actually conduct the audit will base pricing on the number of employees, usually full-time employees. And so if you're a new startup just getting your first year of certification, you have 10 or fewer employees, SOC 2 is usually around, for the certification portion, not for the other things that go into it, around 10,000. So a fraction of the 100,000 you just quoted. Other frameworks, I think ISO 27001 is similar. More specific or narrower ones like HIPAA in the US for health data cost a lot less. I think between 3 and 5,000 for the certification. Um, with ISO, the first one you get is also, it's a 3-year timeline instead of a 1-year renewal on the front end, because it is a pretty heavy lift to get it initially.
So
As
SOC 2
far as
is also 1 year, or how long is
SOC
the
2 is every year, it has to be
every year?
renewed.
Every year has to be, and HIPAA is also every year.
HIPAA is a voluntary one. It's not
Mhm.
mandated, but it is typically on an annual cadence.
It's okay. And you mentioned something about like when you were talking about like SOC 2, there was other bits. Well, what's those other bits other than the certification?
So a lot of companies pursuing a certification will want a governance, risk, and compliance platform of some sort that automates some of the data collection and the monitoring. And typically, there's some sort of bundle with these platforms and the audit portion. There's a way of, you know, streamlining that a little bit. And then the other costs you have to consider are just the hours involved. It's the opportunity cost, the employee time. Um, I think estimating for like ISO, which is more the international standard instead of SOC 2, it can be anywhere from 120 to over 600 hours to prepare for the audit. If you're, just doing it as part of your day job. Um, when it's someone like us facilitating, it's a lot less because we do it, we're familiar, it's a lot more efficient. And Atos takes it off the plate of the actual startup founders. But for most companies that are embarking on this on their own, that it is a lot of hours. One of our clients came to us after having Vanta subscription for a year, and Vanta starts at 5 figures a year for just the service without the audit. And after a year, they were 3% of the way complete on their way to SOC 2 because they just didn't have the bandwidth to tackle it. So that's another consideration. You have to do it at the right time. And in some situations, like this particular client, their customer was requiring it. So they had to get the certification, but it is part of the calculus. You want to do it at the time that makes sense for your business, where you're able to dedicate the time or the resources, either hiring to tackle it, or diverting engineer time or what have you to the process.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so let's take a very simple example in our case. Shayne is starting a new startup. It's an AI startup. It's a simple, very simple app where people go register themselves. They provide their name, their date of birth, and their email. That is the data we are collecting from them. What does this app do is this app lets them um, create some stories for their kids. I don't know, bedtime stories for their kids. But what this app do is takes the input from the user, like kids name, their age, sends it to the AI, create the story for that particular person, the child. Let's say the child's name is Isabel, right? 5 years old, recently learned how to talk. It creates a voice story with AI text to voice conversion. And then that bedtime story is something which the user can play to their kids. What precautions would Shayne will take before even thinking to work on this idea?
I would first consider whether we needed a birth date as part of the collected information. It doesn't seem relevant as long as you can attest that you're, above 18, 16, whatever the age is for the geography. Um, I'd want to look at making sure that none of the user inputted data was going to go back to train the broader model, that it was going to be segmented to prevent any inputs that they put in that they're entering in order to customize it could be coming out in someone else's story. You don't want, you know, someone who's not Isabel's parent getting a story about Isabel. Um, you want to make sure that there are there is that governance overlay, what you were alluding to ensure that nothing inappropriate is being put in there to generate stories. So um, you want to be part of the RAG would have to contain like watchwords, things that you would be looking for that would be inappropriate. Um, I tried to after Halloween, I tried to put a picture of my kid dressed as a vampire in a graveyard, and Gemini wouldn't let me do it. You need that kind of guardrail. Um, and then you want to make sure that it isn't, well, let me back up. You want to think hard about whether the child is designed to interact with the story. If it's just an output that's being told to them, or if they're going to get to ask questions, because then you get into all of the um, the issues around advertising or having child users and controlling what they're putting in and controlling their data, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. Um, you want to be really careful about targeting children with your product or your platform or whatever it is. Um, and there are a lot of regulations pending and ideas out there about what age cutoff is appropriate for kids to have access to LLMs. Um, so top of mind, that's my initial first blush. I think that would be my first round of questions, and then I'd want to dig into how the model is actually being structured, where are the gates, um, how are they designing it, that sort of thing.
So the whole architecture, what kind of cloud services they're using, what kind of guardrails are there, what kind of governance is in place in terms of data ingestion, and if there is a model they're training or not. If they're not training it, they're just using a wrapper, then it comes with more complications, I guess, because you have to protect the data before it goes to the vendor, I guess.
Yeah. If it's just a wrapper, then you need to have watertight agreements in place with whichever LLM you're leveraging to make sure that they're not going to train on the data.
Indeed, indeed. Great stuff. I think we have got quite a lot of understanding of how the data protection could influence the privacy laws, could influence your company being in the startup space. Um, Before we move towards our lightning round, Shayne, um, I would like to know if somebody has this problem right now, what's the best way to deal with it? And how can they connect with you?
I think that if they have a resource internally who is familiar, like if they already have a GC, that's the first step, because they may have some knowledge or expertise on the subject. That being said, most startups tend not to get anyone specialized as a GC or a compliance officer until later series. Um, we are always available. We're at aetos-data.com. It's aetos-data.com. And I'm just Shayne at aetos-data.com. I always available for an email if anyone wanted to reach out directly with a question, just to talk through a situation, review their circumstances, and see if they needed any support. And if we can't help them, we can't help them. But we're always going to be genuine and honest about that, because we really did get into this sector to be available to founders and bridge that gap for them.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Shane. So let's move on to our lightning round. I've got 6 quick fire questions for you. If at any stage you don't want to answer a question, just give me a skip and I can move on to the next one. How's that sound?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great stuff. What are the top 3 red flags you have to always look into your data pipelines to figure out if you are breaking any compliance laws in your demography?
So we don't align to laws because we can't practice law. They're very strict about that in the US. But data red flags would be if you don't know where your data is, if your departments or your different functions are not talking to each other about how they're using data, if your marketing team's not talking to your sales team, etc. And I would say the other one is if you simply don't have a policy for managing and retaining and whatnot. So the location, it's the where, the who, and the what, or the how,
Where
I
the
guess would be the last one.
who and what. Good. That's a good one. Where, who, and what. I should remember that. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
I stick to fiction primarily. I recently wrote an article about how I keep going back to the Phantom Toll Booth. Uh, it's an old kid's book, but the messages about rhyme and reason, and bringing balance between logic and creative thinking are always a good reminder for me.
Stuff. What one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
I think growth mindset, the ability to pivot, the ability to accept constructive criticism, to hear where you might not know everything is critical, because otherwise you're going to get into an echo chamber.
Yeah, totally agree. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
I think that my favorite is just my regular day planner. I actually have a paper one that I copy everything into in the morning, and that helps me. Just the action of writing things down helps me organize my and prioritize my tasks for the day.
Indeed, we love planners, right? Some people just do digital. I love my book one, so there you go.
I have digital too, but the act of writing and copying it over is big.
It just soothes the soul in the morning, isn't it? So, yeah. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
I have been lamenting the loss of actual PDAs, like the old, like the Palm Pilots, because I don't want to get my kids a phone. They're too young, but I want them to learn how to execute on executive functioning and organize their task list and their calendar. But I do my planner on a day-to-day basis. It's because I already know what's set in stone. It's not efficient to do that for months in advance. So I would love a digital way for kids to learn the skills they need to stay organized and on top of their workload and their mental load without it being another internet device, really.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen some of the startups around simplistic or minimalistic phones where the phone has the keyboards and just 4 functions in it. So
Maybe including Snake, right?
yes, that's
I
what I
think
was
that
about to say.
I think the description I saw that what I'm looking for is like a smart dumb phone or a dumb smartphone, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. And last but not least, what's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Um, gosh, I don't know how interesting it is, but I actually started my career as an art history major, and was dead set on going into working in a museum until I panicked and returned to what I knew growing up, which was law school and nonprofit work. So I had a little flight of fancy that I was going to be a curator at one point, and took all sorts of classes. And it's still a passion, but it's not what I do on a day to day basis.
There you go. Now everybody knows about it. So if somebody hears, then okay, I want to do the same. Let's contact Shayne. Great stuff. Well, Shayne, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking all these secrets in the data world, and some of the ups and downs people can face in their start journey. If people want to check out your website, or if people want to get in touch with you directly, you have already mentioned the website and your email address, but is there any other way they can get in touch with you?
Also on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out there. You can just look me up by my name. I'm fairly active on there, so it's easy to get me. Or there's also tools on our website that are available for any founder to see, how much compliance would cost as an investment potentially for them, depending on their risk appetite, market, etc. So that's also just out there and available if anyone wants to take advantage.
Sure. Sure. Shane, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you are doing. It's been
It's
an
been great.
absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Thank you so much, Ash.